Welcome, dear listener, to this evening's audiobook. This reading is brought to you by Sleepy Sounds. Tonight, we will be reading a collection of Grimm's fairy tales. So, as the gentle sound of the soft rain starts to fall, let us begin. A Riddling Tale. 3 women were changed into flowers, which grew in the field, but one of them was allowed to be in her own home at night. Then, once when day was drawing near, and she was forced to go back to her companions in the field and become a flower again, she said to her husband, "If thou wilt come this afternoon and gather me, I shall be set free and henceforth stay with thee." And he did so. Now the question is, how did her husband know her? For the flowers were exactly alike and without any difference. Answer: as she was at her home during the night and not in the field, no dew fell on her as it did on the others. And by this her husband knew her. The end. Death's messengers. In ancient times, a giant was once traveling on a great highway, when suddenly an unknown man sprang up before him and said, "Halt, not one step farther." "What?" cried the giant. "A creature whom I can crush between my fingers wants to block my way? Who art thou, that thou darest to speak so boldly?" "I am Death," answered the other. "No one resists me, and thou also must obey my commands." But the giant refused and began to struggle with Death. It was a long, violent battle. At last, the giant got the upper hand and struck Death down with his fist, so that he dropped by a stone. The giant went his way, and Death lay there conquered, and so weak that he could not get up again. "What will be done now?" said he. "If I stay lying here in a corner, no one will die in the world, and it will get so full of people that they won't have room to stand beside each other." In the meantime, a young man came along the road, who was strong and healthy, singing a song and glancing around on every side. When he saw the half-fainting one, he went compassionately to him, raised him up, poured a strengthening draught out of his flask for him, and waited till he came round. "Dost thou know," said the stranger, whilst he was getting up, "who I am, and who it is whom thou hast helped on his legs again?" "No," answered the youth, "I do not know thee." "I am Death," said he. "I spare no one, and can make no exception with thee, but that thou mayst see that I am grateful. I promise thee that I will not fall on thee unexpectedly, but will send my messengers to thee before I come and take thee away." "Well," said the youth, "it is something gained that I shall know when thou comest, and at any rate be safe from thee for so long." Then he went on his way, and was light-hearted, and enjoyed himself, and lived without thought. But youth and health did not last long. Soon came sicknesses and sorrows, which tormented him by day, and took away his rest by night. "Die I shall not," said he to himself, "for Death will send his messengers before that. But I do wish these wretched days of sickness were over." As soon as he felt himself well again, he began once more to live merrily. Then one day, someone tapped him on the shoulder. He looked round, and Death stood behind him and said, "Follow me. The hour of thy departure from this world has come." "What?" replied the man. "Wilt thou break thy word? Didst thou not promise me that thou wouldst send thy messengers to me before coming thyself? I have seen none." "Silence," answered Death. "Have I not sent one messenger to thee after another? Did not fever come and smite thee, and shake thee and cast thee down? Has dizziness not bewildered thy head? Has not gout twitched thee in all thy limbs? Did not thine ears sing? Did not toothache bite into thy cheeks? Was it not dark before thine eyes? And besides all that, has not my own brother's sleep reminded thee every night of me? Didst thou not lie by night as if thou wert already dead? The man could make no answer. He yielded to his fate and went away with death. The end. Domestic servants. Whither goest thou? To Walpe. I to Walpe, thou to Walpe, so together we'll go. Hast thou a man? What is his name? Cham. My man Cham, thy man Cham. I to Walpe, thou to Walpe, so together we'll go. Hast thou a child? How is he styled? Wild. My child Wild, thy child Wild. My man Cham, thy man Cham. I to Walpe, thou to Walpe, so together we'll go. Hast thou a cradle? How callest thou thy cradle? Hippodadle. My cradle, Hippodadle, my child Wild, thy child Wild. My man Cham, thy man Cham. I to Walpe, thou to Walpe, so together we'll go. Hast thou also a drudge? What name has thy drudge? From thy work do not budge, my drudge. From thy work do not budge, my child Wild, thy child Wild. My man Cham, thy man Cham. I to Walpe, thou to Walpe, so together we'll go. The end. Fair Katrinelje and Piff-Paff Poultry. Good day, Father Hollanthe. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. May I be allowed to have your daughter? Oh, yes. If Mother Malco, Milch Cow, Brother High and Mighty, Sister Casetrout, and fair Katrinelje are willing, you can have her. Where is Mother Malco, then? She is in the cow house, milking the cow. Good day, Mother Malco. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. May I be allowed to have your daughter? Oh, yes. If Father Hollanthe, Brother High and Mighty, Sister Casetrout, and fair Katrinelje are willing, you can have her. Where is Brother High and Mighty, then? He is in the room, chopping some wood. Good day, Brother High and Mighty. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. May I be allowed to have your sister? Oh, yes. If Father Hollanthe, Mother Malco, Sister Casetrout, and fair Katrinelje are willing, you can have her. Where is Sister Casetrout, then? She is in the garden, cutting cabbages. Good day, Sister Casetrout. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. May I be allowed to have your sister? Oh, yes. If Father Hollanthe, Mother Malco, Brother High and Mighty, and fair Katrinelje are willing, you may have her. Where is fair Katrinelje, then? She is in the room, counting out her farthings. Good day, fair Katrinelje. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. Wilt thou be my bride? Oh, yes. If Father Hollanthe, Mother Malco, Brother High and Mighty, and Sister Casetrout are willing, I am ready. Fair Katrinelje, how much dowry due hast thou? 14 farthings in ready money, 3.5 groschen owing to me. 1/2 pound of dried apples, a handful of fried bread, and a handful of spices. And many other things are mine. Have I not a dowry fine? Piff-Paff Poultry, what is thy trade? Art thou a tailor? Something better. A shoemaker? Something better. A husbandman? Something better. A joiner? Something better. A smith? Something better. A miller? Something better. Perhaps a broom maker? Yes, that's what I am. Is it not a fine trade? The end. The Flail from Heaven. A countryman was once going out to plow with a pair of oxen. When he got to the field, both the animals' horns began to grow, and went on growing. And when he wanted to go home, they were so big that the oxen could not get through the gateway for them. By good luck, a butcher came by just then, and he delivered them over to him, and made the bargain in this way, that he should take the butcher a measure of turnip seed, and then the butcher was to count him out a Brabant thaler for every seed. I call that well sold. The peasant now went home, and carried the measure of turnip seed to him on his back. On the way, however, he lost one seed out of the bag. The butcher paid him justly, as agreed on, and if the peasant had not lost the seed, he would have had one thaler the more. In the meantime, when he went on his way back, the seed had grown into a tree which reached up to the sky. Then thought the peasant, as thou hast the chance, thou must just see what the angels are doing up there above, and for once have them before thine eyes. So he climbed up, and saw that the angels above were threshing oats, and he looked on. While he was thus watching them, he observed that the tree on which he was standing was beginning to totter. He peeped down, and saw that someone was just going to cut it down. If I were to fall down from hence, it would be a bad thing, thought he. And in his necessity, he did not know how to save himself better than by taking the chaff of the oats which lay there in heaps, and twisting a rope of it. He likewise snatched a hoe and a flail, which were lying about in heaven, and let himself down by the rope. But he came down on the earth exactly in the middle of a deep, deep hole. So it was a real piece of luck that he had brought the hoe, for he hoed himself a flight of steps with it, and mounted up, and took the flail with him as a token of his truth, so that no one could have any doubt of his story. The end. The Fox and the Geese. The fox once came to a meadow in which was a flock of fine, fat geese, on which he smiled and said, "I come in the nick of time. You are sitting together quite beautifully, so that I can eat you up, one after the other." The geese cackled with terror, sprang up, and began to wail and beg piteously for their lives. But the fox would listen to nothing, and said, "There is no mercy to be had. You must die." At length, one of them took heart and said, "If we poor geese are to yield up our vigorous young lives, show us the only possible favor, and allow us one more prayer, that we may not die in our sins. And then we will place ourselves in a row, so that you can always pick yourself out the fattest." "Yes," said the fox, "that is reasonable, and a pious request. Pray away. I will wait till you are done." Then the first began a good long prayer, forever saying, "Ga, ga." And as she would make no end, the second did not wait until her turn came, but began also, "Ga, ga." The third and fourth followed her, and soon they were all cackling together. When they have done praying, the story shall be continued further. But at present, they are still praying without stopping. The end. The fox and his cousin. The she-wolf brought forth a young one, and invited the fox to be godfather. "After all, he is a near relative of ours," said she. "He has a good understanding and much talent. He can instruct my little son and help him forward in the world." The fox, too, appeared quite honest, and said, "Worthy Mrs. Gossip, I thank you for the honor which you are doing me. I will, however, conduct myself in such a way that you shall be repaid for it." He enjoyed himself at the feast, and made merry. Afterwards he said, "Dear Mrs. Gossip, it is our duty to take care of the child. It must have good food that it may be strong. I know a sheepfold from which we might fetch a nice morsel." The wolf was pleased with the ditty, and she went out with the fox to the farmyard. He pointed out the fold from afar and said, "You will be able to creep in there without being seen. And in the meantime, I will look about on the other side to see if I can pick up a chicken." He, however, did not go there, but sat down at the entrance to the forest, stretched his legs, and rested. The she-wolf crept into the stable. A dog was lying there, and it made such a noise that the peasants came running out, caught Gossip Wolf, and poured a strong, burning mixture, which had been prepared for washing, over her skin. At last she escaped, and dragged herself outside. There lay the fox, who pretended to be full of complaints, and said, "Ah, dear Mistress Gossip, how ill I have fared. The peasants have fallen on me, and have broken every limb I have. If you do not want me to lie where I am and perish, you must carry me away." The she-wolf herself was only able to go away slowly, but she was in such concern about the fox that she took him on her back, and slowly carried him perfectly safe and sound to her house. Then the fox said to her, "Farewell, dear Mistress Gossip. May the roasting you have had do you good," laughed heartily at her, and bounded off. The end. The Fox and the Cat. It happened that the cat met the fox in a forest, and as she thought to herself, "He is clever and full of experience, and much esteemed in the world," she spoke to him in a friendly way. "Good day, dear Mr. Fox. How are you? How is all with you? How are you getting through this dear season?" The fox, full of all kinds of arrogance, looked at the cat from head to foot, and for a long time did not know whether he would give any answer or not. At last he said, "Oh, thou wretched beard cleaner, thou piebald fool, thou hungry mouse hunter, what canst thou be thinking of? Dost thou venture to ask how I am getting on? What hast thou learnt? How many arts dost thou understand?" "I understand but one," replied the cat, modestly. "What art is that?" asked the fox. "When the hounds are following me, I can spring into a tree and save myself." "Is that all?" said the fox. "I am master of 100 arts, and have into the bargain a sack full of cunning. Thou makest me sorry for thee. Come with me. I will teach thee how people get away from the hounds." Just then came a hunter with 4 dogs. The cat sprang nimbly up a tree and sat down on top of it, where the branches and foliage quite concealed her. "Open your sack, Mr. Fox. Open your sack," cried the cat to him. But the dogs had already seized him and were holding him fast. "Ah, Mr. Fox," cried the cat, "you with your 100 arts are left in the lurch. Had you been able to climb like me, you would not have lost your life." The end. The Fox and the Horse. A peasant had a faithful horse, which had grown old and could do no more work. So his master would no longer give him anything to eat, and said, "I can certainly make no more use of thee, but still I mean well by thee. If thou provest thyself still strong enough to bring me a lion here, I will maintain thee. But now take thyself away out of my stable." And with that, he chased him into the open country. The horse was sad, and went to the forest to seek a little protection there from the weather. Then the fox met him and said, "Why dost thou hang thy head so, and go about all alone?" "Alas," replied the horse, "avarice and fidelity do not dwell together in one house. My master has forgotten what services I have performed for him for so many years, and because I can no longer plow well, he will give me no more food, and has driven me out. without giving thee a chance?" asked the fox. The chance was a bad one. He said, "If I were still strong enough to bring him a lion, he would keep me. But he well knows that I cannot do that." The fox said, "I will help thee. Just lay thyself down, stretch thyself out, as if thou wert dead, and do not stir." The horse did as the fox desired, and the fox went to the lion, who had his den not far off, and said, "A dead horse is lying outside there. Just come with me. Thou canst have a rich meal." The lion went with him, and when they were both standing by the horse, the fox said, "After all, it is not very comfortable for thee here. I tell thee what I will fasten it to thee by the tail, and then thou canst drag it into thy cave and devour it in peace." This advice pleased the lion. He lay down, and in order that the fox might tie the horse fast to him, he kept quite quiet. But the fox tied the lion's legs together with the horse's tail, and twisted and fastened all so well and so strongly that no strength could break it. When he had finished his work, he tapped the horse on the shoulder and said, "Pull, white horse, pull." Then up sprang the horse at once, and drew the lion away with him. The lion began to roar, so that all the birds in the forest flew out in terror. But the horse let him roar, and drew him, and dragged him over the country to his master's door. When the master saw the lion, he was of a better mind, and said to the horse, "Thou shalt stay with me and fare well." And he gave him plenty to eat until he died. The end. Frau Trude. There was once a little girl who was obstinate and inquisitive, and when her parents told her to do anything, she did not obey them. So how could she fare well? One day she said to her parents, "I have heard so much of Frau Trude. I will go to her some day. People say that everything about her does look so strange, and that there are such odd things in her house that I have become quite curious." Her parents absolutely forbade her and said, "Frau Trude is a bad woman who does wicked things, and if thou goest to her, thou art no longer our child." But the maiden did not let herself be turned aside by her parents' prohibition, and still went to Frau Trude. And when she got to her, Frau Trude said, "Why art thou so pale?" "Ah," she replied, and her whole body trembled. "I have been so terrified at what I have seen." "What hast thou seen?" "I saw a black man on your steps. That was a collier. Then I saw a green man. That was a huntsman. After that, I saw a blood-red man. That was a butcher." "Ah, Frau Trude, I was terrified. I looked through the window and saw not you, but, as I verily believe, the devil himself with a head of fire." "Oh ho," said she, "then thou hast seen the witch in her proper costume. I have been waiting for thee, and wanting thee a long time already. Thou shalt give me some light." Then she changed the girl into a block of wood, and threw it into the fire. And when it was in full blaze, she sat down close to it, and warmed herself by it, and said, "That shines bright for once in a way." The end. Going a-traveling. There was once a poor woman who had a son, who much wished to travel, but his mother said, "How canst thou travel? We have no money at all for thee to take away with thee." Then said the son, "I will manage very well for myself. I will always say, 'Not much, not much, not much.'" So he walked for a long time and always said, "Not much, not much, not much." Then he passed by a company of fishermen and said, "God speed you, not much, not much, not much. What sayst thou, churl? Not much." And when the net was drawn out, they had not caught much fish. So one of them fell on the youth with a stick and said, "Hast thou never seen me threshing? ought I to say then?" asked the youth. "Thou must say, 'Get it full, get it full.'" After this, he again walked a long time and said, "Get it full, until he came to the gallows, where they had got a poor sinner whom they were about to hang. Then said he, "Good morning, get it full, get it full." "What sayst thou, knave? Get it full? Dost thou want to make out that there are still more wicked people in the world? Is not this enough?" And he again got some blows on his back. "What am I to say then?" said he. "Thou must say, 'May God have pity on the poor soul.'" Again the youth walked on for a long while and said, "May God have pity on the poor soul." Then he came to a pit by which stood a knacker who was cutting up a horse. The youth said, "Good morning, God have pity on the poor soul." "What dost thou say, thou ill-tempered knave?" And the knacker gave him such a box on the ear that he could not see out of his eyes. "What am I to say then?" "Thou must say, 'There lies the carrion in the pit.'" So he walked on and always said, "There lies the carrion in the pit. There lies the carrion in the pit." And he came to a cart full of people. So he said, "Good morning, there lies the carrion in the pit." Then the cart pushed him into a hole, and the driver took his whip and cracked it upon the youth, till he was forced to crawl back to his mother. And as long as he lived, he never went out traveling again. The end. Hans married. There was once upon a time a young peasant named Hans, whose uncle wanted to find him a rich wife. He therefore seated Hans behind the stove and had it made very hot. Then he fetched a pot of milk and plenty of white bread, gave him a bright, newly coined farthing in his hand, and said, "Hans, hold that farthing fast, crumble the white bread into the milk, and stay where you are, and do not stir from that spot till I come back." "Yes," said Hans, "I will do all that." Then the wooer put on a pair of old patched trousers, went to a rich peasant's daughter in the next village and said, "Won't you marry my nephew Hans? You will get an honest and sensible man who will suit you." The covetous father asked, "How is it with regard to his means? Has he bread to break?" "Dear friend," replied the wooer, "my young nephew has a snug berth, a nice bit of money in hand, and plenty of bread to break. Besides, he has quite as many patches as I have." And as he spoke, he slapped the patches on his trousers. But in that district, small pieces of land were called patches also. "If you will give yourself the trouble to go home with me, you shall see at once that all is as I have said." Then the miser did not want to lose this good opportunity, and said, "If that is the case, I have nothing further to say against the marriage." So the wedding was celebrated on the appointed day, and when the young wife went out of doors to see the bridegroom's property, Hans took off his Sunday coat and put on his patched smock frock and said, "I might spoil my good coat." Then, together, they went out, and wherever a boundary line came in sight, or fields and meadows were divided from each other, Hans pointed with his finger and then slapped either a large or a small patch on his smock frock and said, "That patch is mine, and that too, my dearest. Just look at it," meaning thereby that his wife should not stare at the broad land, but look at his garment, which was his own. "Were you indeed at the wedding?" "Yes, indeed I was there, and in full dress. My headdress was of snow. Then the sun came out and it was melted. My coat was of cobwebs, and I had to pass by some thorns which tore it off me. My shoes were of glass, and I pushed against a stone, and they said, 'Clink,' and broke in two." The end. Hares Bride. There was once a woman and her daughter who lived in a pretty garden with cabbages, and a little hare came into it, and during the winter time ate all the cabbages. Then says the mother to the daughter, "Go into the garden and chase the hare away." The girl says to the little hare, "Shh, hare, you are still eating up all our cabbages." Says the hare, "Come, maiden, and seat yourself on my little hare's tail, and come with me into my little hare's hut." The girl will not do it. Next day, the hare comes again and eats the cabbages. Then says the mother to the daughter, "Go into the garden and drive the hare away." The girl says to the hare, "Shh, little hare, you are still eating all the cabbages." The little hare says, "Maiden, seat thyself on my little hare's tail, and come with me into my little hare's hut." The maiden refuses. The third day, the hare comes again and eats the cabbages. On this, the mother says to the daughter, "Go into the garden and hunt the hare away." Says the maiden, "Shh, little hare, you are still eating all our cabbages." Says the little hare, "Come, maiden, seat thyself on my little hare's tail, and come with me into my little hare's hut." The girl seats herself on the little hare's tail, and then the hare takes her far away to his little hut and says, "Now cook green cabbage and millet seed, and I will invite the wedding guests." Then all the wedding guests assembled. Who were the wedding guests? That I can tell you as another told it to me. They were all hares, and the crow was there as parson to marry the bride and bridegroom, and the fox as clerk, and the altar was under the rainbow. The girl, however, was sad, for she was all alone. The little hare comes and says, open the doors, the wedding guests are merry." The bride says nothing, but weeps. The little hare goes away. The little hare comes back and says, take off the lid, the wedding guests are hungry." The bride again says nothing, and weeps. The little hare goes away. The little hare comes back and says, take off the lid, the wedding guests are waiting." Then the bride says nothing, and the hare goes away. But she dresses a straw doll in her clothes, and gives her a spoon to stir with, and sets her by the pan with the millet seed, and goes back to her mother. The little hare comes once more and says, take off the lid, and gets up, and strikes the doll on the head so that her cap falls off. Then the little hare sees that it is not his bride, and goes away, and is sorrowful. The end. Herr Korbes. There were once a cock and a hen who wanted to take a journey together. So the cock built a beautiful carriage which had 4 red wheels and harnessed 4 mice to it. The hen seated herself in it with the cock, and they drove away together. Not long afterwards, they met a cat who said, "Where are you going?" The cock replied, "We are going to the house of Herr Korbes." "Take me with you," said the cat. The cock answered, "Most willingly. Get up behind, lest you fall off in front. Take great care not to dirty my little red wheels. And you little wheels, roll on, and you little mice pipe out, as we go forth on our way to the house of Herr Korbes." After this came a millstone, then an egg, then a duck, then a pin, and at last a needle, who all seated themselves in the carriage and drove with them. When, however, they reached the house of Herr Korbes, Herr Korbes was not there. The mice drew the carriage into the barn. The hen flew with the cock upon a perch. The cat sat down by the hearth. The duck on the well pole. The egg rolled itself into a towel. The pin stuck itself into the chair cushion. The needle jumped onto the bed in the middle of the pillow, and the millstone laid itself over the door. Then Herr Korbes came home, went to the hearth, and was about to light the fire when the cat threw a quantity of ashes in his face. He ran into the kitchen in a great hurry to wash it off, and the duck splashed some water in his face. He wanted to dry it with the towel, but the egg rolled up against him, broke, and glued up his eyes. He wanted to rest, and sat down in the chair, and then the pin pricked him. He fell in a passion, and threw himself on his bed, but as soon as he laid his head on the pillow, the needle pricked him so that he screamed aloud, and was just going to run out into the wide world in his rage. But when he came to the house door, the millstone leapt down and struck him dead. Herr Korbes must have been a very wicked man. The end. Noist and his 3 sons. Between Werrel and Soist, there lived a man whose name was Noist, and he had 3 sons. One was blind, the other lame, and the third stark naked. Once on a time, they went into a field, and there they saw a hare. The blind one shot it, the lame one caught it, the naked one put it in his pocket. Then they came to a mighty big lake, on which there were 3 boats. One sailed, one sank, the third had no bottom to it. They all 3 got into the one with no bottom to it. Then they came to a mighty big forest, in which there was a mighty big tree. In the tree was a mighty big chapel. In the chapel was a sexton made of beechwood and a boxwood parson, who dealt out holy water with cudgels. How truly happy is that one who can from holy water run. The end. Lean Lisa. Lean Lisa was of a very different way of thinking from Lazy Harry and Fat Trina, who never let anything disturb their peace. She scoured everything with ashes, from morning till evening, and burdened her husband, Long Lawrence, with so much work that he had heavier weights to carry than an ass with 3 sacks. It was, however, all to no purpose. They had nothing, and came to nothing. One night, as she lay in bed, and could hardly move one limb for weariness, she still did not allow her thoughts to go to sleep. She thrust her elbows into her husband's side, and said, "Listen, Lenz, to what I have been thinking. If I were to find 1 florin and 1 was given to me, I would borrow another to put to them. And thou too shouldst give me another. And then, as soon as I had got the 4 florins together, I would buy a young cow." This pleased the husband right well. "It is true," said he, "that I do not know where I am to get the florin, which thou wantest as a gift from me. But if thou canst get the money together, and canst buy a cow with it, thou wilt do well to carry out thy project. I shall be glad," he added, "if the cow has a calf, and then I shall often get a drink of milk to refresh me." "The milk is not for thee," said the woman. "We must let the calf suck, that it may become big and fat, and we may be able to sell it well." "Certainly," replied the man, "but still, we will take a little milk. That will do no harm." "Who has taught thee to manage cows?" said the woman. "Whether it does harm or not, I will not allow it, and even if thou wert to stand on thy head for it, thou shouldst not have a drop of the milk. Dost thou think, because there is no satisfying thee, Long Lawrence, that thou art to eat up what I earn with so much difficulty?" "Wife," said the man, "be quiet, or I will give thee a blow on thy mouth." "What?" cried she. "Thou threatenest me, thou glutton, thou rascal, thou lazy Harry." She was just laying hold of his hair, But long Lawrence got up, seized both lean Lisa's withered arms in one hand, and with the other he pressed down her head into the pillow, let her scold, and held her until she fell asleep for very weariness. Whether she continued to wrangle when she awoke next morning, or whether she went out to look for the florin which she wanted to find, that I know not. The end. The Louse and the Flea. A louse and a flea kept house together, and were brewing beer in an eggshell. Then the little louse fell in and burnt herself. On this, the little flea began to scream loudly. Then said the little room door, "Little flea, why art thou screaming?" "Because the louse has burnt herself." Then the little door began to creak. On this, a little broom in the corner said, "Why art thou creaking, little door?" "Have I not reason to creak?" "The little louse has burnt herself. The little flea is weeping." So the little broom began to sweep frantically. Then a little cart passed by and said, "Why art thou sweeping, little broom?" "Have I not reason to sweep? The little louse has burnt herself. The little flea is weeping. The little door is creaking." So the little cart said, "Then I will run," and began to run wildly. Then said the ash heap by which it ran, "Why art thou running so, little cart?" "Have I not reason to run? The little louse has burnt herself. The little flea is weeping. The little door is creaking. The little broom is sweeping." The ash heap said, "Then I will burn furiously," and began to burn in clear flames. A little tree stood near the ash heap and said, "Ash heap, why art thou burning? Have I not reason to burn? The little louse has burnt herself. The little flea is weeping. The little door is creaking. The little broom is sweeping. The little cart is running." The little tree said, "Then I will shake myself," and began to shake herself, so that all her leaves fell off. A girl who came up with her water pitcher saw that and said, "Little tree, why art thou shaking thyself? Have I not reason to shake myself? The little louse has burnt herself. The little flea is weeping. The little door is creaking. The little broom is sweeping. The little cart is running. The little ash heap is burning." On this, the girl said, "Then I will break my little water pitcher." And she broke her little water pitcher. Then said the little spring from which ran the water, "Girl, why art thou breaking thy water jug? Have I not reason to break my water jug? The little louse has burnt herself. The little flea is weeping. The little door is creaking. The little broom is sweeping. The little cart is running. The little ash heap is burning. The little tree is shaking itself." "Oh, ho," said the spring, "then I will begin to flow," and began to flow violently. And in the water everything was drowned. The girl, the little tree, the little ash heap, the little cart, the broom, the little door, the little flea, the little louse, all together. The end. Odds and ends. There was once on a time a maiden who was pretty, but idle and negligent. When she had to spin, she was so out of temper that if there was a little knot in the flax, she at once pulled out a whole heap of it and strewed it about on the ground beside her. Now she had a servant who was industrious, and gathered together the bits of flax which were thrown away, cleaned them, span them fine, and had a beautiful gown made out of them for herself. A young man had wooed the lazy girl, and the wedding was to take place. On the eve of the wedding, the industrious one was dancing merrily about in her pretty dress, and the bride said, "Ah, how that girl does jump about, dressed in my odds and ends." The bridegroom heard that and asked the bride what she meant by it. Then she told him that the girl was wearing a dress, make of the flax which she had thrown away. When the bridegroom heard that and saw how idle she was, and how industrious the poor girl was, he gave her up and went to the other, and chose her as his wife. The end. The Old Man and His Grandson. There was once a very old man whose eyes had become dim, his ears dull of hearing, his knees trembled, and when he sat at table, he could hardly hold the spoon, and spilt the broth upon the tablecloth, or let it run out of his mouth. His son and his son's wife were disgusted at this, so the old grandfather at last had to sit in the corner behind the stove, and they gave him his food in an earthenware bowl, and not even enough of it. And he used to look towards the table with his eyes full of tears. Once, too, his trembling hands could not hold the bowl, and it fell to the ground and broke. The young wife scolded him, but he said nothing, and only sighed. Then they bought him a wooden bowl for a few halfpence, out of which he had to eat. They were once sitting thus when the little grandson of 4 years old began to gather together some bits of wood upon the ground. "What are you doing there?" asked the father. "I am making a little trough," answered the child, "for father and mother to eat out of when I am big." The man and his wife looked at each other for a while, and presently began to cry. Then they took the old grandfather to the table, and henceforth always let him eat with them, and likewise said nothing if he did spill a little of anything. The end. The Peasant and the Devil. There was once on a time a far-sighted, crafty peasant whose tricks were much talked about. The best story is, however, how he once got hold of the devil and made a fool of him. The peasant had one day been working in his field, and as twilight had set in, was making ready for the journey home, when he saw a heap of burning coals in the middle of his field. And when, full of astonishment, he went up to it, a little black devil was sitting on the live coals. "Thou dost indeed sit upon a treasure," said the peasant. "Yes, in truth," replied the devil, "on a treasure which contains more gold and silver than thou hast ever seen in thy life." "The treasure lies in my field and belongs to me," said the peasant. "It is thine," answered the devil. "If thou wilt for 2 years give me the half of everything thy field produces. Money I have enough of, but I have a desire for the fruits of the earth." The peasant agreed to the bargain. "In order, however, that no dispute may arise about the division," said he, "everything that is above ground shall belong to thee, and what is under the earth to me." The devil was quite satisfied with that, but the cunning peasant had sown turnips. Now, when the time for harvest came, the devil appeared and wanted to take away his crop, but he found nothing but the yellow, withered leaves, while the peasant, full of delight, was digging up his turnips. "Thou hast had the best of it for once," said the devil, "but the next time that won't do. What grows above ground shall be thine, and what is under it, mine." "I am willing," replied the peasant. But when the time came to sow, he did not again sow turnips, but wheat. The grain became ripe, and the peasant went into the field and cut the full stalks down to the ground. When the devil came, he found nothing but the stubble, and went away in a fury down into a cleft in the rocks. "That is the way to cheat the devil," said the peasant, and went and fetched away the treasure. The end. sharing joy and sorrow. There was once a tailor who was a quarrelsome fellow, and his wife, who was good, industrious, and pious, never could please him. Whatever she did, he was not satisfied, but grumbled and scolded, and knocked her about and beat her. As the authorities at last heard of it, they had him summoned and put in prison in order to make him better. He was kept for a while on bread and water, and then set free again. He was forced, however, to promise not to beat his wife anymore, but to live with her in peace and share joy and sorrow with her, as married people ought to do. All went on well for a time, but then he fell into his old ways and was surly and quarrelsome. And because he dared not beat her, he would seize her by the hair and tear it out. The woman escaped from him and sprang out into the yard, but he ran after her with his yard measure and scissors, and chased her about, and threw the yard measure and scissors at her, and whatever else came his way. When he hit her, he laughed, and when he missed her, he stormed and swore. This went on so long that the neighbors came to the wife's assistance. The tailor was again summoned before the magistrates and reminded of his promise. "Dear gentlemen," said he, "I have kept my word. I have not beaten her, but have shared joy and sorrow with her." "How can that be," said the judge, "when she continually brings such heavy complaints against you?" "I have not beaten her, but just because she looked so strange, I wanted to comb her hair with my hand. She, however, got away from me and left me quite spitefully. Then I hurried after her, and in order to bring her back to her duty, I threw at her, as a well-meant admonition, whatever came readily to hand. I have shared joy and sorrow with her also, for whenever I hit her, I was full of joy, and she of sorrow, and if I missed her, then she was joyful, and I sorry." The judges were not satisfied with this answer, but gave him the reward he deserved. The end. Stories about snakes. First story. There was once a little child whose mother gave her every afternoon a small bowl of milk and bread, and the child seated herself in the yard with it. When she began to eat, however, a snake came creeping out of a crevice in the wall, dipped its little head in the dish, and ate with her. The child had pleasure in this, and when she was sitting there with her little dish and the snake did not come at once, she cried, "Snake, snake, come swiftly, hither come, thou tiny thing. Thou shalt have thy crumbs of bread, thou shalt refresh thyself with milk." Then the snake came in haste and enjoyed its food. Moreover, it showed gratitude, for it brought the child all kinds of pretty things from its hidden treasures, bright stones, pearls, and golden playthings. The snake, however, only drank the milk and left the breadcrumbs alone. Then, one day, the child took its little spoon and struck the snake gently on its head with it, and said, "Eat the breadcrumbs as well, little thing." The mother, who was standing in the kitchen, heard the child talking to someone, and when she saw that she was striking a snake with her spoon, ran out with a log of wood and killed the good little creature. From that time forth, a change came over the child. As long as the snake had eaten with her, she had grown tall and strong, but now she lost her pretty rosy cheeks and wasted away. It was not long before the funeral bird began to cry in the night, and the redbreast to collect little branches and leaves for a funeral garland, and soon afterwards the child lay on her bier. Second story. an orphan child was sitting on the town walls spinning, when she saw a snake coming out of a hole low down in the wall. Swiftly, she spread out beside this one of the blue silk handkerchiefs which snakes have such a strong liking for, and which are the only things they will creep on. As soon as the snake saw it, it went back, then returned, bringing with it a small golden crown, laid it on the handkerchief, and then went away again. The girl took up the crown. It glittered and was of delicate, golden filigree work. It was not long before the snake came back for the second time. But when it no longer saw the crown, it crept up to the wall, and in its grief smote its little head against it as long as it had strength to do so, until at last it lay there dead. If the girl had but left the crown where it was, the snake would certainly have brought still more of its treasures out of the hole. Third story. A snake says, "Hoo, hoo, hoo, hoo." A child says, "Come out." The snake comes out. Then the child inquires about her little sister. "Hast thou not seen little red stockings?" The snake says, "No, neither have I." "Then I am like you. Hoo, 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 hoo." The end. The straw, the coal, and the bean. In a village dwelt a poor old woman who had gathered together a dish of beans and wanted to cook them. So she made a fire on her hearth, and that it might burn the quicker, she lighted it with a handful of straw. When she was emptying the beans into the pan, one dropped without her observing it, and lay on the ground beside a straw. And soon afterwards, a burning coal from the fire leapt down to the two. Then the straw began and said, "Dear friends, from whence do you come here?" The coal replied, "I fortunately sprang out of the fire, and if I had not escaped by main force, my death would have been certain. I should have been burnt to ashes." The bean said, "I too have escaped with a whole skin, but if the old woman had got me into the pan, I should have been made into broth without any mercy, like my comrades." "And would a better fate have fallen to my lot?" said the straw. "The old woman has destroyed all my brethren in fire and smoke. She seized 60 of them at once and took their lives. I luckily slipped through her fingers." "But what are we to do now?" said the coal. "I think," answered the bean, "that as we have so fortunately escaped death, we should keep together like good companions, and lest a new mischance should overtake us here, we should go away together and repair to a foreign country." The proposition pleased the two others, and they set out on their way in company. Soon, however, they came to a little brook, and as there was no bridge or footplank, they did not know how they were to get over it. The straw hit on a good idea and said, "I will lay myself straight across, and then you can walk over on me as on a bridge." The straw therefore stretched itself from one bank to the other, and the coal, who was of an impetuous disposition, tripped quite boldly onto the newly built bridge. But when she had reached the middle, and heard the water rushing beneath her, she was, after all, afraid, and stood still, and ventured no farther. The straw, however, began to burn, broke in 2 pieces, and fell into the stream. The coal slipped after her, hissed when she got into the water, and breathed her last. The bean, who had prudently stayed behind on the shore, could not but laugh at the event, was unable to stop, and laughed so heartily that she burst. It would have been all over with her likewise, if, by good fortune, a tailor who was traveling in search of work had not sat down to rest by the brook. As he had a compassionate heart, he pulled out his needle and thread and sewed her together. The bean thanked him most prettily, but but as the tailor used black thread, all beans since then have a black seam. The end. Sweet porridge. There was a poor but good little girl who lived alone with her mother, and they no longer had anything to eat. So the child went into the forest, and there an aged woman met her who was aware of her sorrow, and presented her with a little pot, which when she said, "Cook, little pot, cook," would cook good, sweet porridge, and when she said, "Stop, little pot," it ceased to cook. The girl took the pot home to her mother, and now they were freed from their poverty and hunger, and ate sweet porridge as often as they chose. Once on a time, when the girl had gone out, her mother said, "Cook, little pot, cook," and it did cook, and she ate till she was satisfied, and then she wanted the pot to stop cooking, but did not know the word. So it went on cooking, and the porridge rose over the edge, and still it cooked on until the kitchen and whole house were full, and then the next house, and then the whole street, just as if it wanted to satisfy the hunger of the whole world, and there was the greatest distress, but no one knew how to stop it. At last, when only one single house remained, the child came home and just said, "Stop, little pot," and it stopped and gave up cooking, and whosoever wished to return to the town had to eat his way back. The end. The beam. There was once an enchanter who was standing in the midst of a great crowd of people performing his wonders. He had a cock brought in, which lifted a heavy beam and carried it as if it were as light as a feather. But a girl was present who had just found a bit of four-leaved clover, and had thus become so wise that no deception could stand out against her, and she saw that the beam was nothing but a straw. So she cried, "You people, do you not see that it is a straw that the cock is carrying, and no beam?" Immediately the enchantment vanished, and the people saw what it was, and drove the magician away in shame and disgrace. He, however, full of inward anger, said, "I will soon revenge myself." After some time, the girl's wedding day came, and she was decked out, and went in a great procession over the fields to the place where the church was. All at once, she came to a stream which was very much swollen, and there was no bridge and no plank to cross it. Then the bride nimbly took her clothes up and wanted to wade through it. And just as she was thus standing in the water, a man, and it was the enchanter, said mockingly close beside her, "Aha! Where are thine eyes that thou takest that for water?" Then her eyes were opened, and she saw that she was standing with her clothes lifted up in the middle of a field that was blue with the flowers of blue flax. Then all the people saw it likewise, and chased her away with ridicule and laughter. The end. The Bittern and the Hoopoe. "Where do you like best to feed your flocks?" said a man to an old cowherd. "Here, sir, where the grass is neither too rich nor too poor, or else it is no use." "Why not?" asked the man. "Do you hear that melancholy cry from the meadow there?" answered the shepherd. "That is the bittern. He was once a shepherd, and so was the hoopoe also. I will tell you the story. The bittern pastured his flocks on rich green meadows where flowers grew in abundance, so his cows became wild and unmanageable. The hoopoe drove his cattle onto high barren hills where the wind plays with the sand, and his cows became thin and got no strength. When it was evening, and the shepherds wanted to drive their cows homewards, the bittern could not get his together again. They were too high-spirited and ran away from him. He called, "Come, cows, come," but it was of no use. They took no notice of his calling. The hoopoe, however, could not even get his cows up on their legs. So faint and weak had they become. "Up, up, up," screamed he, but it was in vain. They remained lying on the sand. That is the way when one has no moderation. And to this day, though they have no flocks now to watch, the bittern says, "Come, cows, come," and the hoopoe, "Up, up, up." The end. Brides on their trial. There was once a young shepherd who wished much to marry, and was acquainted with 3 sisters who were all equally pretty, so that it was difficult to him to make a choice, and he could not decide to give the preference to any one of them. Then he asked his mother for advice, and she said, "Invite all 3 and set some cheese before them, and watch how they eat it." The youth did so. The first, however, swallowed the cheese with the rind on. The second hastily cut the rind off the cheese, but she cut it so quickly that she left much good cheese with it, and threw that away also. The third peeled the rind off carefully, and cut neither too much nor too little. The shepherd told all this to his mother, who said, "Take the third for thy wife." This he did, and lived contentedly and happily with her. The end. The bright sun brings it to light. A tailor's apprentice was traveling about the world in search of work, and at one time he could find none, and his poverty was so great that he had not a farthing to live on. Presently he met a Jew on the road, and as he thought he would have a great deal of money about him, the tailor thrust God out of his heart, fell on the Jew, and said, "Give me thy money, or I will strike thee dead." Then said the Jew, "Grant me my life. I have no money, but 8 farthings. But the tailor said, "Money thou hast, and it shall be produced," and used violence, and beat him until he was near death. And when the Jew was dying, the last words he said were, "The bright sun will bring it to light," and thereupon he died. The tailor's apprentice felt in his pockets and sought for money, but he found nothing but 8 farthings, as the Jew had said. Then he took him up and carried him behind a clump of trees, and went onwards to seek work. After he had traveled about a long while, he got work in a town with a master who had a pretty daughter, with whom he fell in love, and he married her, and lived in good and happy wedlock. After a long time, when he and his wife had 2 children, the wife's father and mother died, and the young people kept house alone. One morning, when the husband was sitting on the table before the window, his wife brought him his coffee, and when he had poured it out into the saucer and was just going to drink, the sun shone on it, and the reflection gleamed hither and thither on the wall above, and made circles on it. Then the tailor looked up and said, "Yes, it would like very much to bring it to light, and cannot." The woman said, "Oh, dear husband, and what is that then?" "What dost thou mean by that?" He answered, "I must not tell thee." But she said, "If thou lovest me, thou must tell me," and used her most affectionate words, and said that no one should ever know it, and left him no rest. Then he told her how years ago, when he was traveling about seeking work, and quite worn out and penniless, he had killed a Jew, and that in the last agonies of death, the Jew had spoken the words, "The bright sun will bring it to light." And now, the sun had just wanted to bring it to light, and had gleamed and made circles on the wall, but had not been able to do it. After this, He again charged her particularly never to tell this, or he would lose his life, and she did promise. When, however, he had sat down to work again, she went to her great friend and confided the story to her. But she was never to repeat it to any human being. But before 2 days were over, the whole town knew it, and the tailor was brought to trial and condemned. And thus, after all, the bright sun did bring it to light. The end. The Crumbs on the Table. A countryman one day said to his little puppies, "Come into the parlor and enjoy yourselves, and pick up the breadcrumbs on the table. Your mistress has gone out to pay some visits." Then the little dogs said, "No, no, we will not go. If the mistress gets to know it, she will beat us." The countryman said, "She will know nothing about it. Do come. After all, she never gives you anything good." Then the little dogs again said, "Nay, nay, we must let it alone. We must not go." But the countryman let them have no peace until at last they went and got on the table and ate up the breadcrumbs with all their might. But at that very moment, the mistress came and seized the stick in great haste and beat them and treated them very hardly. And when they were outside the house, the little dog said to the countryman, "Dost, dost, 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 dost thou see?" Then the countryman laughed and said, Didn't you expect it?" So they just had to run away. The end. The Ditmarsh Tale of Wonders. I will tell you something. I saw 2 roasted fowls flying. They flew quickly and had their breasts turned to heaven and their backs to hell. And an anvil and a millstone swam across the Rhine prettily, slowly, and gently. And a frog sat on the ice at Whitsuntide and ate a plowshare. 3 fellows who wanted to catch a hare went on crutches and stilts. One of them was deaf, the second blind, the third dumb, and the fourth could not stir a step. Do you want to know how it was done? First, the blind man saw the hare running across the field. The dumb one called to the lame one, and the lame one seized it by the neck. There were certain men who wished to sail on dry land, and they set their sails in the wind and sailed away over great fields. Then they sailed over a high mountain, and there they were miserably drowned. A crab was chasing a hare, which was running away at full speed, and high up on the roof lay a cow which had climbed up there. In that country, the flies are as big as the goats are here. Open the window, that the lies may fly out. The end. The duration of life. When God had created the world and was about to fix the length of each creature's life, the ass came and asked, "Lord, how long shall I live?" 30 years, replied God. Does that content thee? Ah, Lord, answered the ass, that is a long time. Think of my painful existence. To carry heavy burdens from morning to night, to drag sacks of corn to the mill, that others may eat bread, to be cheered and refreshed with nothing but blows and kicks. Relieve me of a portion of this long time. Then God had pity on him and relieved him of 18 years. The ass went away comforted, and the dog appeared. How long wouldst thou like to live? Said God to him. 30 years are too many for the ass, but thou wilt be satisfied with that. Lord, answered the dog, is that thy will? Consider how I shall have to run. My feet will never hold out so long, and when I have once lost my voice for barking and my teeth for biting, what will be left for me to do but run from one corner to another and growl? God saw that he was right and released him from 12 years of life. Then came the monkey "Thou wilt certainly live 30 years willingly," said the Lord to him. "Thou hast no need to work as the ass and the dog have to do, and wilt always enjoy thyself." "Ah, Lord," he answered, "it may seem as if that were the case, but it is quite different. When it rains porridge, I have no spoon. I am always to play merry pranks and make faces which force people to laugh. And if they give me an apple and I bite into it, why, it is sour. How often sadness hides itself behind mirth. I shall never be able to hold out for 30 years. God was gracious and took off 10. At last, man appeared, joyous, healthy, and vigorous, and begged God to appoint his time for him. 30 years shalt thou live, said the Lord. Is that enough for thee? What a short time, cried man, when I have built my house, and my fire burns on my own hearth, when I have planted trees which blossom and bear fruit, and am just intending to enjoy my life, I am to die. O Lord, lengthen my time. I will add to it the ass's 18 years, said God. That is not enough, replied the man. Thou shalt also have the dog's 12 years. Still too little. Well then, said God, I will give thee the monkey's 10 years also, but more thou shalt not have. The man went away, but was not satisfied. So man lives 70 years. The first 30 are his human years, which are soon gone. Then is he healthy, merry, works with pleasure, and is glad of his life. Then follow the ass's 18 years, when one burden after another is laid on him. He has to carry the corn which feeds others, and blows and kicks are the reward of his faithful services. Then come the dog's 12 years, when he lies in the corner, and growls, and has no longer any teeth to bite with. And when this time is over, the monkey's 10 years form the end. Then man is weak-headed and foolish, does silly things, and becomes the jest of the children. The end. The ear of corn. In former times, when God himself still walked the earth, the fruitfulness of the soil was much greater than it is now. Then the ears of corn did not bear 50 or 60, but 400 or 500-fold. Then the corn grew from the bottom to the very top of the stalk, and according to the length of the stalk was the length of the ear. Men, however, are so made that when they are too well off, they no longer value the blessings which come from God, but grow indifferent and careless. One day, a woman was passing by a cornfield when her little child, who was running beside her, fell into a puddle and dirtied her frock. On this, the mother tore up a handful of the beautiful ears of corn and cleaned the frock with them. When the Lord, who just then came by, saw that, he was angry and said, Henceforth shall the stalks of corn bear no more ears. Men are no longer worthy of heavenly gifts. The bystanders who heard this were terrified and fell on their knees and prayed that he would still leave something on the stalks, even if the people were undeserving of it, for the sake of the innocent birds, which would otherwise have to starve. The Lord, who foresaw their suffering, had pity on them and granted the request. So the ears were left as they now grow. The end. The golden key. In the winter-time, when deep snow lay on the ground, a poor boy was forced to go out on a sledge to fetch wood. When he had gathered it together and packed it, he wished, as he was so frozen with cold, not to go home at once, but to light a fire and warm himself a little. So he scraped away the snow, and as he was thus clearing the ground, he found a tiny gold key. Hereupon he thought that where the key was, the lock must be also, and dug in the ground and found an iron chest. If the key does but fit it, thought he, no doubt precious things in that little box. He searched, but no keyhole was there. At last, he discovered one, but so small that it was hardly visible. He tried it, and the key fitted it exactly. Then he turned it once round, and now we must wait until he has quite unlocked it and opened the lid. And then we shall learn what wonderful things were lying in that box. The end. The Lord's animals and the devil's. The Lord God had created all animals and had chosen out the wolf to be his dog, but he had forgotten the goat. Then the devil made ready and began to create also, and created goats with fine, long tails. Now, when they went to pasture, they generally remained caught in the hedges by their tails. Then the devil had to go there and disentangle them, with a great deal of trouble. This enraged him at last, and he went and bit off the tail of every goat, as may be seen to this day by the stump. Then he let them go to pasture alone. But it came to pass that the Lord God perceived how at one time they gnawed away at a fruitful tree, at another injured the noble vines, or destroyed other tender plants. This distressed him, so that in his goodness and mercy he summoned his wolves, who soon tore in pieces the goats that went there. When the devil observed this, he went before the Lord and said, "Thy creatures have destroyed mine." The Lord answered, "Why didst thou create things to do harm?" The devil said, "I was compelled to do it. Inasmuch as my thoughts run on evil, what I create can have no other nature, and thou must pay me heavy damages. I will pay thee as soon as the oak leaves fall. Come then, thy money will then be ready counted out." When the oak leaves had fallen, the devil came and demanded what was due to him. But the Lord said, "In the church of Constantinople stands a tall oak tree, which still has all its leaves." With raging and curses, the devil departed and went to seek the oak, wandered in the wilderness for 6 months before he found it. And when he returned, all the oaks had in the meantime covered themselves again with green leaves. Then he had to forfeit his indemnity, and in his rage he put out the eyes of all the remaining goats and put his own in instead. This is why all goats have devil's eyes and their tails bitten off, and why he likes to assume their shape. The end. The Maid of Brakel. A girl from Brakel once went to St. Anne's Chapel at the foot of the Hindenburg, and as she wanted to have a husband and thought there was no one else in the chapel, she sang, "Oh, holy St. Anne, help me soon to a man. Thou knowst him right well, by Sutmer Gate does he dwell. His hair it is golden, thou knowst him right well." The clerk, however, was standing behind the altar and heard that, so he cried in a very gruff voice, "Thou shalt not have him, thou shalt not have him." The maiden thought that the child Mary, who stood by her mother Anne, had called out that to her, and was angry, and cried, "Fiddle-de-dee, conceited thing, hold your tongue, and let your mother speak." The end. The nail. A merchant had done good business at the fair. He had sold his wares and lined his money bags with gold and silver. Then he wanted to travel homewards and be in his own house before nightfall. So he packed his trunk with the money on his horse and rode away. At noon, he rested in a town, and when he wanted to go farther, the stable boy brought out his horse and said, "A nail is wanting, sir, in the shoe of its left hind foot." "Let it be wanting," answered the merchant. "The shoe will certainly stay on for the 6 miles I have still to go. I am in a hurry." In the afternoon, when he once more alighted, and had his horse fed, the stable boy went into the room to him and said, "Sir, a shoe is missing from your horse's left hind foot. Shall I take him to the blacksmith?" "Let it still be wanting," answered the man. "The horse can very well hold out for the couple of miles which remain. I am in haste." He rode forth, but before long the horse began to limp. It had not limped long before it began to stumble, and it had not stumbled long before it fell down and broke its leg. The merchant was forced to leave the horse where it was, and unbuckle the trunk, take it on his back, and go home on foot. And there he did not arrive until quite late at night. "And that unlucky nail," said he to himself, "has caused all this disaster. Hasten slowly." The end. The Old Beggar Woman. There was once an old woman, but thou hast surely seen an old woman go a-begging before now. This woman begged likewise, and when she got anything, she said, "May God reward you." The beggar woman came to a door, and there, by the fire, a friendly rogue of a boy was standing warming himself. The boy said kindly to the poor old woman as she was standing shivering thus by the door, "Come, old mother, and warm yourself." She came in, but stood too near the fire, so that her old rags began to burn, and she was not aware of it. The boy stood and saw that, but he ought to have put the flames out. Is it not true that he ought to have put them out? And if he had not any water, then should he have wept all the water in his body out of his eyes, and that would have supplied 2 pretty streams with which to extinguish them. The end. The old man made young again. In the time when our Lord still walked this earth, he and St. Peter stopped one evening at a smith's and received free quarters. Then it came to pass that a poor beggar, hardly pressed by age and infirmity, came to this house and begged alms of the smith. St. Peter had compassion on him and said, "Lord and Master, if it please thee, cure his torments, that he may be able to win his own bread." The Lord said kindly, "Smith, lend me thy forge, and put on some coals for me, and then I will make this ailing old man young again." The smith was quite willing, and St. Peter blew the bellows, and when the coal fire sparkled up large and high, our Lord took the little old man, pushed him in the forge in the midst of the red-hot fire, so that he glowed like a rose bush, and praised God with a loud voice. After that, the Lord went to the quenching tub, put the glowing little man into it, so that the water closed over him, and after he had carefully cooled him, gave him his blessing. When behold, the little man sprang nimbly out, looking fresh, straight, healthy, and as if he were but 20. The smith, who had watched everything closely and attentively, invited them all to supper. He, however, had an old, half-blind, crooked mother-in-law who went to the youth, and with great earnestness asked if the fire had burnt him much. He answered that he had never felt more comfortable, and that he had sat in the red heat as if he had been in cool dew. The youth's words echoed in the ears of the old woman all night long, and early next morning, when the Lord had gone on his way again, and had heartily thanked the smith, the latter thought he might make his old mother-in-law young again likewise, as he had watched everything so carefully, and it lay in the province of his trade. So he called to ask her if she too would like to go bounding about like a girl of 18. She said, "With all my heart, as the youth has come out of it so well." So the smith made a great fire and thrust the old woman into it, and she writhed about this way and that, and uttered terrible cries of murder. "Sit still! Why art thou screaming and jumping about so?" cried he, and as he spoke, he blew the bellows again until all her rags were burnt. The old woman cried without ceasing, and the smith thought to himself, "I have not quite the right art," and took her out and threw her into the cooling tub. Then she screamed so loudly that the smith's wife upstairs and her daughter-in-law heard, and they both ran downstairs and saw the old woman lying in a heap in the quenching tub, howling and screaming, with her face wrinkled and shriveled and all out of shape. Thereupon the two, who were both with child, were so terrified that that very night 2 boys were born, who were not made like men but apes. And they ran into the woods, and from them sprang the race of apes. The end. The Peasant in Heaven. Once on a time, a poor pious peasant died and arrived before the gate of heaven. At the same time, a very rich lord came there, who also wanted to get into heaven. Then St. Peter came with the key and opened the door and let the great man in, but apparently did not see the peasant and shut the door again. And now the peasant outside heard how the great man was received in heaven with all kinds of rejoicing, and how they were making music and singing within. At length, all became quiet again, and St. Peter came and opened the gate of heaven and let the peasant in. The peasant, however, expected that they would make music and sing when he went in also, but all remained quite quiet. He was received with great affection, it is true, and the angels came to meet him, but no one sang. Then the peasant asked St. Peter how it was that they did not sing for him, as they had done when the rich man went in, and said that it seemed to him that there in heaven things were done with just as much partiality as on earth. Then said St. Peter, "By no means, thou art just as dear to us as anyone else, and wilt enjoy every heavenly delight that the rich man enjoys. But poor fellows like thee come to heaven every day. But a rich man like this does not come more than once in 100 years. The end. The Shepherd Boy. There was once on a time a shepherd boy whose fame spread far and wide because of the wise answers which he gave to every question. The king of the country heard of it likewise, but did not believe it, and sent for the boy. Then he said to him, "If thou canst give me an answer to 3 questions which I will ask thee, I will look on thee as my own child, and thou shalt dwell with me in my royal palace." The boy said, "What are the 3 questions?" The king said, "The first is, how many drops of water are there in the ocean?" The shepherd boy answered, "Lord King, if you will have all the rivers on earth dammed up, so that not a single drop runs from them into the sea until I have counted it, I will tell you how many drops there are in the sea." The king said, "The next question is, how many stars are there in the sky?" The shepherd boy said, "Give me a great sheet of white paper." And then he made so many fine points on it with a pen that they could scarcely be seen, and it was all but impossible to count them. Anyone who looked at them would have lost his sight. Then he said, "There are as many stars in the sky as there are points on the paper. Just count them." But no one was able to do it. The king said, "The third question is, how many seconds of time are there in eternity?" Then said the shepherd boy, "In Lower Pomerania is the Diamond Mountain, which is 2.5 miles high, 2.5 miles wide, and 2.5 miles in depth. every 100 years, a little bird comes and sharpens its beak on it. And when the whole mountain is worn away by this, then the first second of eternity will be over. The king said, "Thou hast answered the 3 questions like a wise man, and shalt henceforth dwell with me in my royal palace, and I will regard thee as my own child." The end. The Shroud. There was once a mother who had a little boy of 7 years old, who was so handsome and lovable that no one could look at him without liking him, and she herself worshipped him above everything in the world. Now, it so happened that he suddenly became ill, and God took him to himself. And for this, the mother could not be comforted, and wept both day and night. But soon afterwards, when the child had been buried, it appeared by night in the places where it had sat and played during its life. And if the mother wept, it wept also. And when morning came, it disappeared. As, however, the mother would not stop crying, it came one night in the little white shroud in which it had been laid in its coffin, and with its wreath of flowers round its head, and stood on the bed at her feet and said, "O mother, do stop crying, or I shall never fall asleep in my coffin, for my shroud will not dry because of all thy tears which fall upon it." The mother was afraid when she heard that, and wept no more. The next night the child came again, and held a little light in its hand, and said, "Look, mother, my shroud is nearly dry, and I can rest in my grave." Then the mother gave her sorrow into God's keeping, and bore it quietly and patiently, and the child came no more, but slept in its little bed beneath the earth. The end. The soul. The fishes had for a long time been discontented because no order prevailed in their kingdom. None of them turned aside for the others, but all swam to the right or the left as they fancied, or darted between those who wanted to stay together, or got into their way. And a strong one gave a weak one a blow with its tail, which drove it away, or else swallowed it up without more ado. "How delightful it would be," said they, "if we had a king who enforced law and justice among us." And they met together to choose for their ruler the one who could cleave through the water most quickly and give help to the weak ones. They placed themselves in rank and file by the shore, and the pike gave the signal with his tail, on which they all started. Like an arrow, the pike darted away, and with him the herring, the gudgeon, the perch, the carp, and all the rest of them. Even the sole swam with them and hoped to reach the winning place. All at once, this was heard: "The herring is first." "Who is first?" said angrily the flat, envious sole, who had been left far behind. "Who is first?" "The herring. The herring," was the answer. "The naked herring," said the jealous creature. "The naked herring." Since that time, the sole's mouth has been at one side for a punishment. The end. The star money. There was once on a time a little girl whose father and mother were dead, and she was so poor that she no longer had any little room to live in, or bed to sleep in. And at last she had nothing else but the clothes she was wearing, and a little bit of bread in her hand, which some charitable soul had given her. She was, however, good and pious, and as she was thus forsaken by all the world, she went forth into the open country, trusting in the good God. Then a poor man met her, who said, "Ah, give me something to eat. I am so hungry." She reached him the whole of her piece of bread, and said, "May God bless it to thy use." and went onwards. Then came a child who moaned and said, "My head is so cold. Give me something to cover it with." So she took off her hood and gave it to him. And when she had walked a little farther, she met another child who had no jacket and was frozen with cold. Then she gave it her own. And a little farther on, one begged for a frock, and she gave away that also. At length, she got into a forest, and it had already become dark. And there came yet another child, and asked for a little shirt. And the good little girl thought to herself, "It is a dark night, and no one sees thee. Thou canst very well give thy little shirt away," and took it off, and gave away that also. And as she so stood, and had not one single thing left, suddenly some stars from heaven fell down, and they were nothing else but hard, smooth pieces of money. And although she had just given her little shirt away, she had a new one, which was of the very finest linen. Then she gathered together the money into this, and was rich all the days of her life. The end. The Stolen Farthings. A father was one day sitting at dinner with his wife and his children, and a good friend who had come on a visit was with them. And as they thus sat, and it was striking 12 o'clock, the stranger saw the door open, and a very pale child dressed in snow-white clothes came in. It did not look around, and it did not speak, but went straight into the next room. Soon afterwards, it came back, and went out at the door again in the same quiet manner. On the second and on the third day, it came also exactly in the same way. At last the stranger asked the father, to whom the beautiful child that went into the next room every day at noon belonged. "I have never seen it," said he. Neither did he know to whom it could belong. The next day, when it again came, the stranger pointed it out to the father, who, however, did not see it, and the mother and the children also all saw nothing. On this, the stranger got up, went to the room door, opened it a little, and peeped in. Then he saw the child sitting on the ground, and digging and seeking about industriously amongst the crevices between the boards of the floor. But when it saw the stranger, it disappeared. He now told what he had seen, and described the child exactly, and the mother recognized it, and said, "Ah, it is my dear child who died a month ago." They took up the boards and found 2 farthings, which the child had once received from its mother, that it might give them to a poor man. It, however, had thought, "Thou canst buy thyself a biscuit for that," and had kept the farthings, and hidden them in the openings between the boards. And therefore it had had no rest in its grave, and had come every day at noon to seek for these farthings. The parents gave the money at once to a poor man, and after that the child was never seen again. The end. The story of Schlaueraffenland. In the time of Schlaueraffen I went there, and saw Rome and the Lateran hanging by a small silken thread, and a man without feet who outran a swift horse, and a keen sharp sword that cut through a bridge. There I saw a young ass with a silver nose, which pursued 2 fleet hares, and a lime tree that was very large, on which hot cakes were growing. There I saw a lean old goat, which carried about 100 cartloads of fat on his body, and 60 loads of salt. Have I not told enough lies? There I saw a plough ploughing without horse or cow, and a child of 1 year threw 4 millstones from Ratisbon to Treves, and from Treves to Strasbourg, and a hawk swam over the Rhine, which he had a perfect right to do. There I heard some fishes begin to make such a disturbance with each other that it resounded as far as heaven, and sweet honey flowed like water from a deep valley at the top of a high mountain. And these were strange things. There were 2 crows, which were mowing a meadow, and I saw 2 gnats building a bridge, and 2 doves tore a wolf to pieces. 2 children brought forth 2 kids, and 2 frogs threshed corn together. There I saw 2 mice consecrating a bishop, and 2 cats scratching out a bear's tongue. Then a snail came running up and killed 2 furious lions. There stood a barber and shaved a woman's beard off, and 2 sucking children bade their mother hold her tongue. There I saw 2 greyhounds, which brought a mill out of the water, and a sorry old horse was beside it, and said it was right. And 4 horses were standing in the yard threshing corn with all their might, and 2 goats were heating the stove, and a red cow shot the bread into the oven. Then a cock crowed, "Cock-a-doodle-doo." The story is all told. Cock-a-doodle-doo. The end. The 3 Sluggards. A certain king had 3 sons, who were all equally dear to him, and he did not know which of them to appoint as his successor after his own death. When the time came when he was about to die, he summoned them to his bedside and said, "Dear children, I have been thinking of something which I will declare unto you. Whichsoever of you is the laziest shall have the kingdom." The eldest said, "Then, Father, the kingdom is mine, for I am so idle that if I lie down to rest and a drop falls in my eye, I will not open it that I may sleep." The second said, "Father, the kingdom belongs to me, for I am so idle that when I am sitting by the fire warming myself, I would rather let my heel be burnt off than draw back my leg." The third said, "Father, the kingdom is mine, for I am so idle that if I were going to be hanged and had the rope already round my neck, and anyone put a sharp knife into my hand with which I might cut the rope, I would rather let myself be hanged than raise my hand to the rope." When the father heard that, he said, "Thou hast carried it the farthest, and shalt be king." The end. The wise servant. How fortunate is the master, and how well all goes in his house when he has a wise servant who listens to his orders and does not obey them, but prefers following his own wisdom. A clever John of this kind was once sent out by his master to seek a lost cow. He stayed away a long time, and the master thought, "Faithful John does not spare any pains over his work." As, however, he did not come back at all, the master was afraid lest some misfortune had befallen him, and set out himself to look for him. He had to search a long time, but at last he perceived the boy, who was running up and down a large field. "Now, dear John," said the master, when he had got up to him, "hast thou found the cow which I sent thee to seek?" "No, master," he answered, "I have not found the cow, but then I have not looked for it." "Then what hast thou looked for, John?" "Something better, and that luckily I have found." "What is that, John?" "3 blackbirds," answered the boy. "And where are they?" asked the master. "I see one of them, I hear the other, and I am running after the third," answered the wise boy. Take example by this. Do not trouble yourselves about your masters or their orders, but rather do what comes into your head and pleases you, and then you will act just as wisely as prudent John. The end. The water nix. A little brother and sister were once playing by a well, and while they were thus playing, they both fell in. A water nix lived down below, who said, Now I've got you. Now you shall work hard for me," and carried them off with her. She gave the girl dirty, tangled flax to spin, and she had to fetch water in a bucket with a hole in it. And the boy had to hew down a tree with a blunt axe, and they got nothing to eat but dumplings as hard as stones. Then, at last, the children became so impatient that they waited until one Sunday, when the nix was at church, and ran away. But when church was over, the nix saw that the birds were flown, and followed them with great strides. The children saw her from afar, and the girl threw a brush behind her, which formed an immense hill of bristles, with thousands and thousands of spikes, over which the nix was forced to scramble with great difficulty. At last, however, she got over. When the children saw this, the boy threw behind him a comb, which made a great hill of combs with 1,000 times 1,000 teeth. But the nix managed to keep herself steady on them, and at last crossed over that. Then the girl threw behind her a looking-glass, which formed a hill of mirrors, and was so slippery that it was impossible for the nix to cross it. Then she thought, "I will go home quickly and fetch my axe and cut the hill of glass in half." Long before she returned, however, and had hewn through the glass, the children had escaped to a great distance, and the water nix was obliged to betake herself to her well again. The end. The Wilful Child. Once upon a time, there was a child who was wilful, and would not do as her mother wished. For this reason, God had no pleasure in her, and let her become ill, and no doctor could do her any good, and in a short time she lay on her deathbed. When she had been lowered into her grave, and the earth was spread over her, all at once her arm came out again, and stretched upwards, and when they had put it in, and spread fresh earth over it, it was all to no purpose, for the arm always came out again. Then the mother herself was obliged to go to the grave, and strike the arm with a rod, and when she had done that, it was drawn in, and then at last the child had rest beneath the ground. The end. The Wolf and the Man. Once on a time, the fox was talking to the wolf of the strength of man, how no animal could withstand him, and how all were obliged to employ cunning in order to preserve themselves from him. Then the wolf answered, "If I had but the chance of seeing a man for once, I would set on him notwithstanding." "I can help thee to do that," said the fox. "Come to me early tomorrow morning, and I will show thee one." The wolf presented himself betimes, and the fox took him out on the road by which the huntsman went daily. First came an old, discharged soldier. "Is that a man?" inquired the wolf. "No," answered the fox, "that was one." Afterwards came a little boy who was going to school. "Is that a man?" "No, that is going to be one." At length came a hunter with his double-barreled gun at his back, and hanger by his side. Said the fox to the wolf, "Look, there comes a man. Thou must attack him, but I will take myself off to my hole." The wolf then rushed on the man. When the huntsman saw him, he said, "It is a pity that I have not loaded with a bullet," aimed, and fired his small shot in his face. The wolf pulled a very wry face, but did not let himself be frightened, and attacked him again, on which the huntsman gave him the second barrel. The wolf swallowed his pain and rushed on the huntsman, but he drew out his bright hanger and gave him a few cuts with it right and left, so that, bleeding everywhere, he ran howling back to the fox. "Well, brother wolf," said the fox, "how hast thou got on with man?" "Ah," replied the wolf, "I never imagined the strength of man to be what it is. First, he took a stick from his shoulder and blew into it. And then something flew into my face, which tickled me terribly. Then he breathed once more into the stick, and it flew into my nose like lightning and hail. When I was quite close, he drew a white rib out of his side, and he beat me so with it that I was all but left lying dead. "See what a braggart thou art," said the fox. "Thou throwest thy hatchet so far that thou canst not fetch it back again." The end. Thank you for taking the time to listen along with me this evening. I hope this has helped to relax you and that you have enjoyed the story. If there are any stories you would like to hear in the future, please leave a comment in the section below. And please consider subscribing so that you won't miss out on all the stories coming to the channel very soon. And until next time, goodbye for now.